This is the story of what happened to Pam St. Clement after she left EastEnders, and how the woman behind Pat Butcher built a complicated third act away from Albert Square. Those years brought freedom, pain, public loss, animal welfare work, unexpected returns, and a homecoming few viewers expected. For more than 25 years, Pam St. Clement ranked among the most recognizable faces on British television. Pat Wicks first appeared on 12th June 1986, and when her final regular episode aired on January 1st, 2012, St. Clement had completed 2,183 episodes. Names, husbands, and loyalties changed along the way, yet the earrings, the sharp tongue, and the emotional toughness tied Pat permanently to EastEnders. Leaving could never feel like an ordinary career move. When St. Clement announced the decision in July 2011, she put it simply, the time had come to hang up Pat's earrings. She also described the departure as a bereavement, and that single word tells us far more about the years ahead than any farewell. This meant losing a daily world, familiar colleagues, and a character who had filled more than half of her adult working life. Pat's exit carried a finality few soap departures ever do. Cancer claimed her in the New Year's Day episode of 2012, which meant no casual return to the Queen Vic and no easy excuse to put those earrings back on. Viewers lost Pat Butcher for good. St. Clement now faced life without the routine that had shaped a quarter of a century. What followed was not a disappearance. From March until December 2012, St. Clement joined ITV's This Morning as its resident animal expert, revealing a side of herself that Pat's storylines had rarely shown. The choice only seemed surprising. Animals had mattered to her long before Albert Square existed. Years earlier, a foster family on a Devon farm had given St. Clement some of her most formative experiences. 2 working Shire horses, Duchess and Violet, became part of that world, and she later described the family in those years as a foundation stone in her life. After a childhood shaped by loss and foster care, the farm offered stability. It also helped form the animal advocate viewers met after EastEnders. That commitment stayed with her once the soap schedule ended. St. Clement supported the RSPCA, the Global Wildlife Fund, Brooke, the PDSA, Hearing Dogs for Deaf People, and Veteran Horse Welfare, while also serving as vice president of her local RSPCA branch. This was never a celebrity pastime attached to retirement. Its roots reached back to the years that had given her security. This Morning allowed the public to meet more of Pam and less of Pat. Audiences accustomed to an intimidating East End matriarch now heard her talk about animals, care, and welfare, which created a gentler public image without making her work any less serious. The change mattered. It showed how much of St. Clement's real identity had always lived beyond the soap. Recognition arrived in the same year. In April 2012, only months after Pat's death, St. Clement received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the British Soap Awards, while the departure story also earned nominations for Best Single Episode and Best Exit. The industry had already begun treating her EastEnders career as television history. That happened quickly. Television never disappeared completely from her life. July 2014 brought a guest appearance on Loose Women, and in November she briefly became Pat again for BBC Children in Need. That short return could not reverse the character's death, yet it proved how firmly Pat remained lodged in the public memory. A glimpse of the earrings could reopen decades of EastEnders history. February 2015 brought another reunion when St. Clement joined Barbara Windsor for EastEnders, Back to Ours, marking the program's 30th anniversary. Pat and Peggy Mitchell had fought, reconciled and dominated the same fictional streets, while the women playing them built a genuine friendship away from the cameras. Their pairing carried more than nostalgia. It carried shared history. That same month, St. Clement published The End of an Earring, a title that captured the strange position she now occupied. Pat's earrings had grown into pieces of British television culture, yet St. Clement kept none of the originals because they belonged to the BBC Costume Archive. Replica and donated pairs later raised money for charity. Even the earrings found another life. The memoir placed EastEnders inside a far larger story. Before Pat came the death of St. Clement's mother from tuberculosis shortly after her birth, a childhood in foster homes, the Devon Farm, teacher training and acting studies at Rose Bruford College. She had once hoped to become a veterinarian, but failing Latin at school closed that route. Reinvention did the rest, carrying her from an unsettled childhood to one of British television's best-known roles. Readers also saw more of the private woman behind the public figure. St. Clement married Andrew Gordon in 1967, divorced him in 1976, and has no children, while her memoir described a later relationship with a woman named Diana, remembered as intelligent and fun to be with. She is bisexual and campaigned with Stonewall against Section 28 and for an equal age of consent for gay men. Publicity never became the point. EastEnders still held a place in her life, and that changed shape again in May 2016. During Peggy Mitchell's final storyline, St. Clement appeared opposite Barbara Windsor in an imagined scene, using memory rather than literal resurrection to bring Pat back. The moment reunited them one last time on screen. It also respected the finality of Pat's death. Viewers received nostalgia, while St. Clement carried something heavier. Mike Reed, who played Pat's best-known husband, Frank Butcher, died in 2007, and Wendy Richard, remembered as Pauline Fowler, died in 2009. Both losses came before St. Clement left the program. Her post-EastEnders years had already begun beneath the shadow of a cast changing forever. That imagined meeting with Peggy grew more painful after Barbara Windsor developed Alzheimer's disease. St. Clement remained in close contact with Windsor's husband, Scott Mitchell, and later spoke about the sadness of going nearly a year without seeing her friend during the pandemic. Distance became part of the illness. So did helplessness. Barbara Windsor died on December 10, 2020, and St. Clement's tribute cut straight through the public language of mourning. A light had gone out, she said, capturing a friendship that belonged both to EastEnders and to their private lives. Another living link to the program's defining era had vanished. This loss reached far beyond a former colleague. Here is where the tragedy of St. Clement's later years becomes real, yet easy to distort. Nothing in the record points to financial ruin, abandonment, or a slide into obscurity, because the sadness came through separation, aging, chronic pain, and the slow loss of people who shared her greatest professional chapter. That story is quieter than scandal. It is also more honest. Work carried on alongside the grief. In August 2016, St. Clement appeared in Casualty's 30th anniversary special as Sally Hodge, described as a grumpy patient, before returning in February and March 2017 for an explosion storyline and a road accident. December brought another appearance, this time with Sally diagnosed with breast cancer. Pat was gone, but the actor remained. Sally Hodge gave St. Clement a different part, while still drawing on her ability to mix hardness with vulnerability. These appearances also showed that she had not abandoned acting, only the punishing rhythm of a continuing soap. Her later career moved in shorter bursts. That gave her room to choose. November 2017 placed her in the ITV documentary Gone to Pot American Road Trip, which explored medical cannabis in the United States. This subject connected directly to her own health, because St. Clement lived with polymyalgia rheumatica, an inflammatory condition causing pain and stiffness in the shoulders, neck, and hips. A knee replacement formed another part of that history. Pain was not theoretical for her. 1 month later, St. Clement revealed that she used cannabis oil every day to manage the condition. The oil had changed her life, she explained, leaving her no longer in pain, and she also called for legalization. Her words were blunt and personal. They came from experience rather than fashion. For a performer of her generation and public profile, that position stood out. Decades spent playing a woman associated with old East End attitudes had not made St. Clement cautious away from the role, and she spoke openly about an unconventional treatment while challenging the law around it. Independence had always shaped her choices. This was another example. The health problems mattered, but they never swallowed the rest of her life. No reliable evidence points to severe decline, and that's where the public image can easily become misleading. St. Clement adapted through charity work, occasional television, and open advocacy. Pain influenced the path without erasing the person. Animals remained the clearest line, running through everything. In November 2021, St. Clement spoke to Your Horse about the Devon farm and her support for Brooke, whose work centers on working animals, then appeared the following month in a Christmas special discussing their welfare. The subject had followed her across decades. It still felt personal. By this stage, the EastEnders world around her had changed again. Barbara Windsor had gone, and on the 3rd of April 2022, June Brown died at the age of 95 after decades as Dot Cotton. Brown belonged to the generation that helped turn the program into a national institution. Another pillar had fallen. These were not simply famous deaths in a newspaper for St. Clement. Pat, Peggy, Pauline, and Dot had occupied the same fictional streets, while the actors behind them shared studios, scripts, rehearsals, and long stretches of working life. The public remembered characters. She remembered people. Surviving a famous era turns a performer into its keeper. Every tribute brings warmth, but it also confirms that the world being honored is slowly disappearing, and St. Clement increasingly carried that burden as one of the remaining witnesses to an early, defining period of British soap. She had played Pat. Now, she also guarded the memory around her. None of that turned her into a museum piece. Animal welfare still occupied a large part of her public identity, stretching across domestic pets, wildlife, working horses, and assistance animals. The connection was personal. A child who found security on a Devon farm had become an older performer, using fame to speak for animals. That thread gives her post-EastEnders years their clearest shape. Leaving the soap did not strip away her purpose, because it allowed an older part of her identity to return to the front. Latin had blocked the veterinary career she once wanted. Decades later, public advocacy gave animals another route into her life. Fame had also left scars. During her EastEnders years, tabloids repeatedly targeted her weight and pushed the nickname Fat Pat, while photographs taken after she lost several stone through dieting in 1998 triggered speculation that she had become seriously ill. St. Clement had to correct the story herself. The attention could be cruel. That history helps explain the privacy she protected so fiercely. St. Clement knew exactly what happened when newspapers treated her body as public property, and in later years, she spoke when friendship, pain, cannabis oil, or animals gave her a reason. Everything else stayed hers. She did not owe the public total access. December 2025 changed the pattern once more. St. Clement returned as Pat for a one-off Christmas appearance within the story of Nigel Bates and his worsening dementia, with Paul Bradley playing Nigel and Dementia UK working with the program. The news carried immediate emotional force. Pat was coming home without undoing her death. Writers placed Pat inside Nigel's experience, rather than bringing her literally back to life. That choice preserved the ending from 2012 while drawing on the character's emotional power for a story about memory, confusion, and loss. It was a careful return. The past entered through the mind. For St. Clement, the set felt familiar at once. She described the welcome as being just like coming home, and after years of anniversary programs, imagined scenes, and brief references, she once again stood inside the show that had shaped her career. The distance collapsed. Albert Square still knew her. Viewers responded with strong emotion, which showed that Pat's place in the program had not faded. This did not feel like a novelty cameo, because many people saw a piece of their own television history and remembered the marriages, feuds, bereavements, and family turmoil they had watched her survive. Recognition arrived instantly. So did affection. The dementia context gave the appearance another layer. Pat returned as someone carried inside another character's mind, while St. Clement herself had become one of the surviving links to an older EastEnders. And the storyline asked what remains when memory can no longer hold the past securely. That made the return hurt. It also made it fit. Her departure now meant something different. Pat's death in 2012 had seemed to close every door. Yet 13 years later, St. Clement showed how a character can continue through memory even when the story rules out a literal comeback. Death ended Pat's life. It did not erase her presence. May 2026 brought another appearance, this time in the second season of the Disney Plus series Rivals. EastEnders colleagues who had kept in contact helped arrange the cameo, meaning an opportunity in her later career grew directly from relationships formed during the years she once feared losing. The old world still opened doors. It had not abandoned her. By now, Pam St. Clement was not moving through a tragic ending. She had entered a later chapter where chronic pain, the deaths of friends, and the shock of leaving EastEnders sat beside charity work, acting, public advocacy, a memoir, and a welcome back to Albert Square. The sadness remained real. So did the purpose. That distinction matters. Calling these her tragic final years only works when final describes the last act of her career after EastEnders, not the closing stage of her life, because St. Clement remains alive and active, with no supported story of terminal illness, financial hardship, or abandonment. The truth is less sensational. It carries more weight because of that. Her later years show what can happen when an actor outlives the role that defined her. First comes separation, followed by the slow construction of a new routine. And over time, the character becomes history, while colleagues become memories. Every return grows heavier. Every reunion carries an absence. For St. Clement, the journey started with a bereavement and reached, at least for now, a homecoming. She escaped the daily pressure of EastEnders without ever escaping Pat Butcher's shadow, because viewers never wanted to surrender the character completely. Rejecting that legacy would have been easy. Instead, she chose when to let it back in. Those choices followed meaning rather than frequency. St. Clement returned for charity, anniversaries, Peggy's farewell, and Nigel's dementia story, and each appearance acknowledged everything that had changed instead of pretending the old years could simply resume. Pat never became ordinary again. Rarity gave her power. Away from Albert Square, St. Clement used the time for work rooted in her values. Animal welfare reached back to the Foster family, and Devon Farm she called her foundation. Cannabis advocacy grew from lived pain, and the memoir placed Pat's earrings inside a much larger life. None of it felt manufactured. Each part belonged to her, privacy remained the final boundary. A childhood of instability, decades of public work, and relentless tabloid scrutiny never persuaded St. Clement to explain every corner of herself. And that reserve kept a distance between the familiar character and the woman playing her. Pat felt knowable. Pam never entirely did. Her third act after EastEnders cannot be reduced to one mood. It contains the loss of Pat and her return through imagination, the deaths of Barbara Windsor and June Brown, physical pain followed by outspoken advocacy, and retirement from the soap without retirement from public life. Loss kept meeting return. Silence kept meeting purpose. The real test was whether leaving EastEnders would diminish her. It did not, because although the schedule became quieter, each appearance carried more meaning, and her place in television history grew clearer with time. Less exposure did not mean less importance. In her case, the opposite happened. Pam St. Clement's post-EastEnders years are tragic only in the ordinary human sense that time removes people, routines, and certainty. They are also years of resilience, filled with animals, an honest memoir, relief from pain, new acting work, and a path back to the program she had described leaving as a bereavement. Grief never owned the whole story. She kept moving. This is not the tale of a forgotten soap star fading away. It is the story of a woman learning to live beyond an institution while carrying its history. And when she returned to EastEnders in December 2025, the welcome showed that neither the program nor its viewers had forgotten what she gave them. Home still recognized her. That mattered. Pat Butcher's life ended on New Year's Day 2012, while Pam St. Clement's continued. What came next was not collapse, but a long, complicated, and deeply human afterlife for one of British television's most unforgettable performers.